All right. How are we doing, everyone? Happy Sunday. Ted Elsner, Sacramento Historical Fencing Academy. And today we are going to do things a little bit differently. I've been playing around with what I want to do with this live stream. And I apologize if there's a lot of wind noise. I got a storm that was in last night. It might be coming back in. Who knows? Anyway, we are going today, instead of showing you the Zornhau and the Scheitelhau, because we've done those in a previous live stream, they're basic cuts that we've talked about, we're going to start a discussion about the Meisterhauw themselves, and this will probably take us through in the next few weeks, with today in particular being how to use them to break guards. Now, this is a majorly contentious issue that, people have a lot of different opinions on. Wait for that wind to die down. And there's different takes, right? Some people feel that guard breaking means that we're going to be able to get in there and hit the person directly without them being able to respond. Other people feel that it means putting the point in someone's face and provoking a response from there. And what we're going to show you today and kind of work through with this is our personal interpretation of how the Meisterhauw should be used in conjunction with the work that we've been doing on the rules of the Rostock. So I've actually got a video, because I didn't know if it was going to be raining this morning or not, that I'm going to go ahead and run that will have that information. It's not as long as I wanted to. We ran into some technical difficulties at the very end of it. Those technical difficulties are just about 2 feet and a couple of inches tall, and you'll see them in the video. And so when we switch back to the live video, I'll answer any questions, and we'll just kind of continue on from what was going on in there. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a partner to work with today, but in the video I did, so we have some there to work with. So I'm going to go ahead and fire that up. We'll watch that for a few minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it some more. So for today's lesson, we're going to be looking at the Meisterhauw. Now, we want to look at them specifically, not just as the cuts they are, as we've talked about in previous live streams, but specifically how we're going to use them to break an opponent's guard and what we mean by that. What is our actual intention? Now, contrary to what we normally find, where people interpret the Meisterhauw to be this attack that is intended to hit every single time, that's not how we actually view them. Instead, what we're really looking to do is use them to set up an optimal binding situation that then we're going to be able to attack our opponent directly. The reason that we do this, like so many things that we do, has to do with Meyer's rules of the Rostock. Now, if you've been watching the videos that we've been putting up for the last couple of weeks on the rules of the Rostock, we've mentioned that the second rule is that before we ever attack to an opponent's body, we want to make ourselves secure with parrying. And the same thing applies when we work through the Meisterhauw and attack an opponent. We're going to use them to make ourselves secure so that then we can attack directly to their body, not straight in. If you do that, there's a very real risk that a double can occur, or you're going to get pushed aside in such a way that maybe you're not able to follow on with your attack, and that's not really where we want to be. So, before I go on, guys, something in the future for these live streams that you may want to do, if you've been watching our videos throughout the week, go ahead and ask us questions about them, and we'll respond to them here during the live stream as well. Whether it's a pre-recorded session, like this one right now, it's supposed to be raining tomorrow. I know it looks sunny, but when this goes up, who knows? Or you just want to know something. Throw them in the questions during the week in a comment. We'll follow them up here and answer. But let's jump to it. Luckily today I have an assistant that will help me to work on the Meisterhauw. So let's take a look at that. Wait, I almost forgot. Some of you are probably not as familiar with the Meisterhauw as Meyer defines them, even though that term gets used all the time. There are ultimately 5 of them that we're going to go through. Now, they are the Scheitelhauw, the Krumpphauw, the Zwerchhauw, the Scheitelhauw, and the Zornhauw, right? Those are our 5 cuts that make up the Meisterhauw. Now, interestingly, of those 5 cuts, 4 of them can be used to break an opponent's guard, whereas then all 5 of them have application as an opponent leaves the guard. So initially we're going to be looking at the breaking of the guard, with the first thing that we want to look at being kind of high to low, how to break someone up in the Vomtag Legger, someone in Oberhut, or excuse me, someone in Ox, someone in Flug, and then someone down in Alber. For that, we're going to cover first the Zwerchhau, then the Krumpau, then the Schielhau, and finally the Scheitelhau. So let's take a look at the first breaking that we're going to do, which is going to be a person entering into the Oberhut, or Vomtag. The classic answer to this is going to be the Zwerchhau. Now, we're given actually a couple of choices on how we want to respond to this. The first and more classical way that people will do it is, as a person rises up, we're going to come in and we're going to strike. Now, important on this, I want to spring well off to the side so that I get around Jeff's point and actually threaten him with my point directly. If I were to come straight in with this, I tend not to be able to get around as much and actually protect myself. Hello, baby running through. And I can't threaten his face, but if I step out and away, now we can threaten the face a little bit better. Something to consider during this one, though. If we look at the rules of the Rostock, and specifically the rule about changing through as we're chasing, we might actually find that we want to go a little bit different way. We'll jump around and come up and get our Zwerch out to the side and threaten from the other side. So in this situation, I actually like this one and this variation on it a lot because my hands end up being protected. It's much easier to come up from below, threaten the face, and even if Jeff comes down with his cut fully, we can catch. Now, obviously, Meyer indicates repeatedly that the Zwerch should come around to the opponent's left initially, and it's totally a fine thing to do. But when we look at the rules of the Rostock, we do find some interesting alternative applications that we might decide to go through with this one. Okay, how you doing, Bubba? Baby. Game off. Now, as we play it, as we play through on this one, there are alternate ways that we can also choose to step. I always want to step to the opponent's side, but I may choose to step through with a false step as well as spring out to the side. Yes, my dear? One other way that we can decide to do this is, as Jeff rises up and I come in with it, is step across with our false step and catch on hanging blade. This is great then if we want to allow it to fail and run off to strike around. But we're still protected with our sword above our head at that point and able to deliver the strike. So, just a way to think about. Okay? Maybe you have an idea about this, you have a comment, go ahead and throw it down in there and we'll respond as soon as this section is complete. Let's now take a look at the Krumpau. The Krump is going to be used against someone going into Ox. Classically on this, we'll find, especially when we're described in the RDL situation, somebody will go into their left Ox. Not something that people do a lot of in fencing unless they're a left-hander. And in that situation, we're told to spring out and throw the strike over the top of their hands. This has led to interpretations where when someone goes into their right Ox, that will do the same springing. But this doesn't really get us to our advantageous bind that we want to work from for our opponent. So instead, again, if we look at the Rostock rules that tell us that we want to change through against a person coming up, we can step over, get our initial bind, and then wind it back in and finish very easily, right? So one more time, if I'm hanging out down here and I spring through and strike it, wind it and press, it gets us where we want to be a lot better. Now, obviously, this is a little bit of a different interpretation by gaining the initial bind and working from there. Maybe you have questions, comments about this that you're interested in how or why we're doing it. So let's take a break for a moment and go ahead and enter them in the chat below. We'll talk about it real fast, and then we'll get back and cover our other two cuts, the Zornhau, the Schielhau and the Scheitelhau. So go ahead and put your comments in below, guys, and then we'll jump right back to it. So we're back. I'm going to try to go through this on the diagram I have set up back here on my Pel. We'll see if it works out for this, and hopefully it'll answer kind of what we're talking about here. So I want to look, because I didn't really explore it in the video. We were going to go back and touch on it as well, and we didn't get there. But I want to kind of explore that issue with the Zwerk in particular, used as an advantageous bind kind of situation, and how it applies within the rules of the Rostock, and how we're kind of interpreting it here. So one of the first things that we need to look at for doing these Meisterhauw, right, is that they kind of, in some ways, break a rule for us, right? If we're doing an attack with Nachreisen, normally we're attacking into the opening that the person left, not into their sword. Whereas when we're using the Meisterhauw to break a guard, we're actually explicitly attacking to the opening where their sword is currently lying. Now, we're initiating it as an action in Nachreisen as they're moving and chasing up into that space, but rather than going completely where they're not, we're going to where they are. So that's a big difference right off the bat that kind of breaks out from some of the normal rules that we'd otherwise follow, which kind of, exceptions to the rules exist. Now, see if this will work out. One of the things that we really see with these use, especially when we're doing the type of Meisterhauw that tend to flank around the side, which is going to be things like the Zwerk and the Crump, that we're going to put the bind in that outer ring, right up, where's that? Right here-ish, right? It's going to happen, but it'll be a position we can still attack from. So if I just threw a Zornhauer, right, and I end up in this bind out here, I'm in an underbind situation. I'm going to have to do additional actions like winding, disengaging around, either pulling, disengage, ablaufen, depending on where we're at. But when I throw the action as a Zwerkau, I come up and I catch in that outer bind where I want it to occur, right? And it still kind of happens up in there. Now, in the video, I'm on the opponent's left side. From my perspective, as I'm actually looking at it, because I can't get the angle where you'd be able to see it, my bind is on the right side. I have the overbind where I want it to be and strike around directly. Now, if the opponent fights back against this, right, if they decide to strengthen by, switching over into a slice, I can certainly do the classic Zwerkcopter and strike around to the other side. But I'm also here in a pretty good position as they go and strengthen to, in this case, actually just immediately turn my long edge back into it to wind them back down if I need to, and go from there. Or if they're pushing really hard, I can also Zwerk around to the other side as they strike in, and end up getting a doubling behind the blade kind of situation. Let me just adjust here. All right, so we kind of are setting up that bind where we want it to occur. And especially when somebody's coming from above, it gives us a lot of different options, right? They're going to strike down from above. We're putting our sword up above our head as a parrying that we can work from. Now, I'm going to tangent here just a little bit on this, in that in a lot of ways, the Zwerkau, I think, has some interesting connections to Kronhau. Now, traditionally, when we think of Kron, people are usually thinking of going up with the point above the head with horizontal quillions, and that's what we're told. But at the same time, we're just told horizontal quillions, and when we see other applications, sometimes they're being held with a second hand. There's some of the images in the RDL tradition, and so one of the things we look at with Kron for this is that it's like a Zwerkau, except instead of getting the strike around, it's going to come up and catch flat out in front of us, so that then we could strike down with the Kronhau behind the blade. It gets us in a similar position, but without the added threat that comes around, which then makes the Zwerk make more sense as a Meisterhauw, because not only does it get us to that quillions above the head kind of protecting us position that Kron might be used for, but also threatens at the same time, thereby making it a better attack kind of across the board. Okay, so we can look at it from there. The Crump falls into a similar kind of situation, right? Where we want to get that bind. Now, in the video, I kind of noted that, we might throw a traditional crump in the opponent's face. Now, this can work, certainly. We can get to this position, and if they don't do anything to engage the blade, we just turn and stab them. And, often, depending on where our feet are, that may be the easier option. But if we can get on top of their blade with the short edge, when they try and change through, it becomes a very simple matter of just unwinding your sword to put the long edge back in. Or, as I showed in the video, if you have that short edge, turning the long edge back in gives you a really nice thrust to the face that when I was doing it to Jeff, I actually had to be really careful not to accidentally stab him in the face because the angle's set up so well that the sword just wanted to go right into his face. So we're getting to the outside. We're taking that lateral motion to the side to establish our ideal bind in the outer circles, right, of the diagram, and then work from there. Excuse me while I had to put my diagram back up where I can see it, right, so that we describe. So we've got that, kind of these outer circles to work around from on either side that we're going to attack our opponent along. Now, realistically, what I just realized I should be using for this is, instead of Meyer's circular diagram, his other diagram where it's a folded kind of image and one side is brought forward would probably be even better here. So in a future video when I do this, I'll change it out for that other diagram, which I think will make it easier for you guys to see as we look at this. So that kind of sets up our, use of the Meisterhauw and the way that we want to look at them. Now, there is something that I kind of want to note in this process as well. We're going to talk about it in the future, but the way that we're going to interpret our various openings and what we choose has less to do with the general position of the sword and much more to do with the relative position of the hands, right? So if someone's going up into a shoulder Vomtag, which is why I prefer the term Overhoot as opposed to Vomtag, so they go up to that shoulder Vomtag, right? And they're coming from over here. A lot of interpretations would say, well, I should throw a Zwerchhau against that because their attack is going to come from above. But it's not going to come from above. It's going to come, in this case, from my right opening, right? There we go. So we'll adjust in there. If I'm holding it off on the side here, right, the attack is coming from this upper right opening. If I strike in, even if I strike straight down, it's still coming out of the upper right opening. And in that kind of situation, a Zwerch may not be the best solution to that. Instead, we find that something like a Krumpau or even a Schielhau may be a better choice to deal with that strike. The Schielhau going to be a vertical strike that'll catch that cut coming in from the side, right, even if I'm cutting straight down, and offset it, strike inside the line, penetrating the opponent's attack and counterattacking in turn. On the other hand, if, I crump against that, I get a nice beat on the blade. This leads to another thing. When I say that I'm looking for an advantageous bind with the Meisterhauw, I'm really talking about breaking the guards in the vor, right? I'm trying to bind on their blade, make myself secure with parrying, Meyer's second rule of the Rostock, before launching any attacks directly to their body, so that they aren't given an opportunity to double as well. And that's kind of the way that we look at it, is the Meisterhauw create these advantageous binds that are going to make us secure with parrying and allow us to continue on. So there was another question that also came up in the comments on one of my Rostock videos that I wanted to talk about and respond to, and that is this whole concept of, if I've been driven into one of these outer parryings, how to respond to it. And so the Meisterhauw are kind of intended to prevent this from happening, right? I'm not going to end up in the disadvantaged bind where I have to strike around. I'm going to be able to continue to work to the center. Even if my initial attack flanked around to the side, I'm still coming back to the middle as I continue to fight. So, but let's say I threw a Zornhau instead, right? And I end up binding, let's see if I can get the angles on this, over here in the outer circle, right? If I do that as a Zwerch, I'm not concerned. I just attack to the middle. But here now, I need to find this next line right here, right, these lines right here that are coming in behind the bind, so that then I know where to safely attack. So you can see, I'm just trying to make sure, you can kind of see, there's some diagonal lines coming across the top as well. So I can strike around through to regain that bind, end up in a much more secure position, and then assault my opponent directly. So again, that's kind of the downside if I attack my opponent with one of the four, kind of chief attacks, right? Oberhauer, Zornhau, not as a Meisterhauw in this case, Mittelhau, or Unterhau. I'm going to end up in a bind that may force me to strike around to come in, whereas using the Meisterhauw prevent that from occurring. Now, we didn't get into, in the video, unfortunately, because of my daughter, the Schielhau and the Scheitelhau usage. We'll cover that next week as we continue to build on this. Also, guys, as I mentioned in the video, we're finishing up the basic rules of the Rostock kind of layout. I'll have the last videos going up this week with the discussion of the final rule, the fifth rule, and then the poem. The fifth rule is pretty quick. It'll just take a couple of minutes when it goes up. The poem takes a bit more to unpack and kind of get into for a little more meat. And so, that video, will probably generate a lot of questions that we'll have to answer. After that, though, we're going to start going into implications. We're going to look at, as part of it, all of the various techniques that show up in Meyer's 1570, and using the rules of the Rostock, be able to identify, when and where and the why that we want to use those techniques. What are the specific characteristics, what are the specific situations that we want to use them for? Then, once that's done, we're going to now start going through in the future Meyer's plays in the longsword and look at the rules of the Rostock as it applies to that. Not only to our own actions, but especially what the rules tell us about what we think the opponent is doing that would lead to us doing the actions that Meyer has described. Okay? I got a big old bumblebee. They are not murder hornets. Don't kill them, people. Bumblebees, they're fine, they're big, they're stupid. And so that's going to be what we're going to kind of working on. To that end, I want to use these Sunday live streams, especially going forward, to answer questions that people have about them, because the rules do take some getting used to. They take some unpacking to get comfortable with. And so that's going to be kind of the purpose moving forward. So if you have questions, you're welcome to bring them to the live stream, but also leave a question on any other videos. We'll save them up, and every Sunday we'll respond to any questions you had about the material that we posted during the week during these live sessions, so that we can get that information back to you as quickly as possible. So I think that's about it for today. We're going to keep the videos at about a half hour unless we have those questions coming in. If you do want to see, more training videos, guys, we'll share some. There's some great ones being produced these days. We I don't want to compete with everybody on that when we can provide some different material. So if there are those specifics, let us know. Ask a question. We'll answer them during the live stream. And otherwise, guys, I hope that, this is proving useful to you, that having, this opportunity to kind of work through a different section of Meyer and approach it holistically with, a kind of different take on things will open, some eyes, maybe cause you to ask some questions of your own, start to think about it. Even if you don't agree with us fully, it can be the kind of thing that leads to a greater understanding for all of us kind of moving forward into the future. But otherwise, guys, as I said, we're going to do about a half hour, which is what we're coming up on right now. Yeah, so, sorry, question that just appeared. That was basically, should the rules be anything revolutionary? Well, no, they shouldn't be, right? Like, as we work through these rules, they shouldn't be something that, to someone that knows how to fence, blows your mind. Because they're good fencing. They're rules of good fencing. But for a lot of us, especially if we're coming at things from a, how to put this? a technique as a bag of tricks focused view. And unfortunately, I don't want to name any names or call anybody out, but there are a lot of people in the historical fencing community, especially if you're only following like one source and maybe one of the earlier sources because they're limited in scope. That oh, these techniques have to be done exactly like this, exactly like this. That's what it is. When you're given a piece, that's what you're supposed to do. Well, yeah, but at the same time, they're teaching tools, right? Fencing is going to always be something that has to respond to what our opponent is doing, right? I can't go in as a robot and say, well, okay, I do this cut, and then I have to do this action, this action, this action, this action, this action. Because along the way, well, what happens if your opponent does something stupid? They do something unexpected. You better be able to change, right? You don't want to worry about trying to, oh, I'll do this, and then the counter, and then like, it's one of the things that Meyer is very nice about is that he'll tell you, okay, cut into this. And then you should, you should cut, you should thrust, you should do one of these various handworks. And he kind of leaves it at that. And if you're just reading the 1570 and you don't have a experienced background, that's really frustrating, right? Because, well, what do you want me to do, Meyer? I don't know. And so earlier tradition stuff is often very comforting because they tell you, oh, you do this, then you do this, then you do this. And that's great, except that you do this, you expect the opponent to do this so that you can do this. And they don't do the middle thing. They do something stupid because they're human, and humans do stupid things. And so now you're stuck on a path. Versus a rules-based system, like we're finding with Meyer and the Rostock, where I do this thing, I see what they do in response. Now, a smart person will do A, but maybe they do B, and then rather than worrying about moving on to my original C, I respond to B and go on from there. Is it easier? No. Is it more comforting? No. Is it better? Arguably, yes. Maybe. I think so. Maybe you don't. Argue with me. That's great. I love it. Keeps going, makes these videos a lot more fun for me. So, I guess at the end of the day, long-winded, none of this should be revolutionary. And if you do something like Fiore or Bolognese or English fencing, God forbid, there should be elements of this that seem very, very familiar. They seem very comforting. They seem the same. I'm not saying that everybody in Europe during the 16th century fenced exactly the same way. In fact, we can legitimately say that there are disagreements on that. Meyer, in his rapier, always stands right foot forward for the most part. Very few passing steps that occur, almost none. But then you look at, contemporary Frenchman that has some very similar stuff. Saint Didier, he likes to stand left foot forward when he's doing his stance. That's what he feels is better. There's similarities in the rest of what he teaches, but there are differences. So not everybody's doing the same thing. But good fencing looks like good fencing because there are certain things that just work. Anyway, yeah, so that's going to be the material that we go through. And there's going to be some of it, guys, that's going to get a little controversial. We have a whole theory that we're working on for the Rostock image here, combined with some Fibonacci sequence stuff. You might have seen us post about it on Facebook. That leads to a lot of interpretations of winding and binding and where action should go and finding that we have a whole map. We'll get into that in the future. You may want to argue about it. That's great. I'd love to hear from you. But that's going to be what we're working on, guys. We're changing up things a little bit as we go forward with this, not knowing how long we're going to go on. So hopefully this will get more valuable to you. As always, if you have those questions, leave it on a video. We'll answer it on Sunday. And otherwise, guys, it's been a pleasure. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.